Batman's most underrated villains. And we're going to do a top 10 this time. Let's jump right into it. At number 10, Scarface and the Ventriloquist. Which might sound like a funny character to choose because at the end of the day, he is a little goofy and quirky in some senses. I mean, when I initially first saw this character on the animated series, and it's the scrawny little guy who's shy, and you see that there's this gang that he's running crime with, but he has this puppet, this doll, basically, that is at the head of all of this. I remember the reveal and the look on Batman's face when he saw that. It was just like, what? But I always found the ventriloquist to be fascinating because he's so insane that he has this evil personality, this evil side to him that he doesn't have enough confidence to portray himself, to be the guy behind all of this. So he gets this doll, this puppet, and he puts that persona onto the doll. I always thought that they could have used this character more because I've never seen him in anything else but that show. Number 9, the Clock King. The Clock King, sure, he originally started off as a Green Arrow villain, and in fact, he's been on the TV show Arrow. He's going to be on The Flash. So now he is getting his just due, but I first initially saw him on, again, the animated series, and I liked the way he was portrayed on that episode, where basically he was this guy who, he had his regimen, he had his schedule, he was stuck in his ways where he had everything mapped out for his days, for his weeks, and you couldn't tell him anything different. Until one day he ran into the mayor of Gotham, and the mayor pretty much said, look, you need to loosen up, you need to have fun. Forget the schedule for one day, just do what you want to do, and you won't regret it. So of course he takes the advice, but what happens is that he has the worst day that anyone could ever have. It's horrible. So it ruins his life. So what does he do? A couple of years later, he snaps, he goes off, he kidnaps the mayor, and he tries to kill him for revenge. There you go. At number 8, the Mad Hatter. The Mad Hatter, I'm sure when most people hear that name, they think of Alice in Wonderland. They think of the story that they saw as kids and how lovable and likable this character was. I didn't have that with the Mad Hatter. When I thought of the Mad Hatter, when I first saw the Mad Hatter, it was on Batman. And he was this guy who was completely obsessed with this girl that he worked with named Alice. He was in love with her, and he desperately wanted to be with her so bad that he created, well, he was already working on this sort of mind control thing with lab rats, but he tried to use it on people. Her. He wanted to mind control her and force her to be his girlfriend, force her to be his Alice. So he was also obsessed with the Alice in Wonderland story, and he became that persona of the Mad Hatter. It's very creepy, it says a lot about these Batman writers who take something as innocent as a children's story and turn it into this perverse killer. Because even in the comics, the Mad Hatter is so crazy that he'll target a girl, just name her Alice. He'll say she's Alice, even if that's not her name. He'll kidnap her, he'll tie her up, he'll dress her up, he'll kill her, and then he moves on to another girl and does the same thing. So he can be pretty creepy. I don't know if you could legally use this character in a movie or something. I don't know. Number 7, the Man-Bat. Sure, the Man-Bat might not be the best villain to use, like, just by himself in a movie, but I think you could use him as a secondary villain if you're going to have one of these more intellectual but less physical threat to Batman. Have the Man-Bat be the physical threat. Have him be the one that he battles. But even as a person, the scientist who he experiments with bat DNA, mostly because he wants to improve his hearing. He's going deaf. So obviously the splicing of bat DNA, what does that do? It turns him into this giant man-sized bat. And I liked how when he would go out and do all of these weird and crazy things, people would see just his silhouette of this giant bat and think, holy crap, that's Batman. Batman is going around and killing people. It ruins his reputation, so Batman not only has to stop this crazy creature from killing people, but he has to save his reputation. So I like that. Number 6, Poison Ivy. Now you could say Poison Ivy has been in a live-action movie, so how is she underrated? Well, and I don't even think that her portrayal necessarily was all that bad. Uma Thurman, I thought, was a pretty decent, albeit very over the top. She could have been more grounded to make it better. But I think her portrayal was fairly accurate to the character. But I think if you took this character and put it in not even a more serious movie, I mean, yeah, a more serious movie would help. But I think you could do her character in an actually good movie, and that would sway some people's perception of the character. Because sure, on the surface, she can come off as just this crazy plant lady who just has these weird plant vines that can wrap you up. But I always found her as a person interesting. The fact that she is this big environmentalist who is more in love with plants, more in love with the earth than people. In fact, she thinks people are the scum and that plants need to take over. At number 5, Killer Croc. Killer Croc is another one of those characters who maybe by himself isn't the most interesting, but as a secondary physical threat to Batman, this guy who is a murderer, serial killer, breaks out of prison and whatnot, Waylon Mercy, he's pretty sick. He has this disease that makes his skin all scaly and discolored. So that's how he gets that persona. That's how he looks like a croc. But not only that, he fully embraces this whole thing. He now uses this and eats people. Or he'll maim people by biting off their arm or their leg, and he kind of gets off on tasting human flesh. That's pretty dark. Can you do that in a PG-13 movie? I don't know. If you look at the Arkham Asylum video game and how scary he is, and that level you have to go through in the sewer with him, perfect example. Number 4, Hush. I admit Thomas Elliot isn't the best Batman villain of all time, because when you look at his backstory and the fact that I like that he's connected to Bruce's past. I like that he was a childhood friend of Bruce Wayne and that they grew up together. But he was pretty sick. He tried to kill his parents. But actually Bruce's father, Thomas Wayne, he saved his mother's life. So from that point on, Thomas Elliot had resentment for the Waynes and Bruce's parents. So from there, he went off and became a surgeon, and he was sort of so crazy that he performed plastic surgery on himself and would pretend to be other people and commit these crimes to ruin their reputation, like Bruce Wayne. I like how deranged he is. I like that he is this well-educated type person connected to Bruce's past that is willing to mutilate himself in order to prove his point. At number 3, Clayface. Clayface might be one of the most unrealistic Batman characters, which is saying a lot because I've named some pretty unrealistic characters already. But Clayface, if you look at Matt Hagen, that version of Clayface, who was this famous actor who was famous for a while until he started to get older, he started to lose that leading man role. He had to find some way to get that back, and he found this experimental cream that would take away his wrinkles. But then he started to need it bad. He became addicted to it, and through this really bad deal where he couldn't afford the cream anymore. The guys who he owed it to pretty much taught him a lesson and poured a shit ton of this cream on him, and it messed up his DNA, and it made his skin all moldy and clay-like, and that's how he became Clayface. He's this big, huge, almost monster-looking thing. He can shapeshift and be different people, whoever he wants, but he also has trouble controlling it. If you were to use him in a live-action film, he would have to be CGI, especially at this point. But as much as I love the gritty, dark, realistic Batmans, I would love continuity where it was a little bit over the top, where it was a little bit more comic booky. And I think Clayface would be a perfect representation of a character to do something like that. Speaking of unrealistic villains, at number 2, Mr. Freeze. And Mr. Freeze is very important to be this high on this list because Arnold Schwarzenegger in his portrayal of Mr. Freeze in Batman and Robin was atrocious. Say what you want to say about how it's comical to watch now. You can have fun with it, the ice puns and whatnot. Sure, fine. But I think a lot of people see the Mr. Freeze character, they can't take him seriously. And I don't blame them. How can you look at that Mr. Freeze and think that it's possible to do him seriously? And I think even the idea of that would make some people laugh. And that's all thanks to Joe Schumacher, and that pisses me off. The whole tragic backstory that was created by Paul Dini on the animated series with his wife, not only the backfiring research that happened with him and what turned him into this Freeze character, but his wife having the disease, and it was such a terminal disease that he froze her so that he could work on a cure. And then that's when the accident happened to him. So now, as Mr. Freeze, he's committing these crimes to get enough money, to get enough resources to continue his work for her. And she's the only reason why he continues on. She's the only reason why he is willing to do all of the evil things that he does. And of course, his cold-hearted demeanor helps as well. It sucks because I almost think that we'll never see Mr. Freeze in a serious movie ever. At number 1, for my all-time most underrated Batman villain, Scarecrow. And Scarecrow, he's interesting because he has been used a lot, not only on animated stuff, but he was in a movie. He was in Batman Begins. And as much as I love Cillian Murphy as Jonathan Crane, I still think there's so much more we could do with the character. He's very fascinating for more than one reason. If you look at him, he's this well-respected doctor who works in Arkham, who nobody suspects to be this evil, creepy guy, but he's obsessed. He's obsessed with the human mind and how fear works and how that can take control of a person and what it makes people do. And somebody who is so obsessed with fear, I think, is a perfect match, a perfect intellectual threat to Batman. Sure, he's another one of these characters that physically he shouldn't be able to do anything to Batman, but he can screw him up mentally. The fear gas would be perfect for it. So guys, that's my list for my top 10 most underrated Batman villains. Let me know in the comments below what you think of my list and who is your most underrated Batman villain. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. Later!